Okay, so one of the habitats that we find on the deep sea, on the abyssal plain, will be deep sea corals. These were actually discovered in the 1700s, but most of our knowledge about the deep sea corals actually came in the past 12 years, because that's when we've had the most technology available to us to be able to actually discover some stuff about the deep sea. This picture just shows you where you can actually find deep sea corals. You will find deep sea corals on the continental shelf and also on seamounts between depths of 250 and 6,000 meters and in really, really cold water, so between 4 and 12 degrees Celsius. So if you remember, normal corals are found in the tropical areas because they need clear, shallow water and lots of sunlight and they need warm water. Deep sea corals, opposite. They're completely different. They live in deep water with no sunlight and very cold water. So how they actually get food is they have large polyps that they use to capture food. Shallow water corals have zooxanthellae that they use to get food, but these deep sea corals do not have the luxury of zooxanthellae and photosynthesis, so they actually have to capture all of their food. They do grow slowly because there's not a lot of food in the deep sea, and so they grow very slowly. They may be thousands of years old. We don't know. They just grow very slowly. And we think that they provide a habitat for different creatures in the deep sea. So we think there might be a lot of fish around that area, but there's still a lot that we don't know about them. Even though they are very poorly understood, they are already under threat. So commercial fishing in the deep sea threatens deep sea corals because they will crush the corals, and so they drag a net along the bottom with these wheels on it. Then when the wheels roll over the coral, they crush it and kill it. And so that's a problem. And then also ocean acidification. As we get more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, we get more carbon dioxide being dissolved in the seawater, making carbonic acid, which will then make the ocean more acid and will then interfere with the growth of the corals, both shallow water and deep water. Okay, another habitat that you'll find in the deep sea are cold seeps. These were discovered in 1984 and they're located in the middle of the plates. And we find these where methane gas is actually seeping out of the crust of the earth. And where we find them in U.S. waters in the Gulf of Mexico, Monterey Bay, Washington State, and Alaska, and then in international waters in the Sea of Japan, the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, and the Atlantic coast of Africa. That's where we find them. Here's a picture showing you where we actually find them. So the purple dots are where you would find them. The food source for these kinds of habitats is chemosynthesis. So chemosynthesis is when you make sugar from a chemical reaction instead of using the energy from the sunlight to create glucose. So you can have chemosynthesis using methane or hydrogen sulfide. So you can see the two reactions on the slide that have the reactions written out for you. But they basically take chemicals and use them to make sugars. And so the bacteria that actually do these at the cold seeps are the basis of the food chain here. And they're like the primary producers of the cold seep ecosystem. So all of these animals that live at these cold seeps depend on chemosynthetic bacteria for food. And the way that they can get energy from the bacteria are they can either eat the free-living bacteria themselves, they can have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria, so a mutualistic relationship, or they can eat something that depends on the bacteria. So just like a plant, right? You can eat the plant directly, you can have a relationship with the plant like coral and zooxanthellae, or you can eat something that eats the plant. So like you're a shark eating a fish that's eating the plant. Okay, so just basically like a plant. Just using chemicals rather than photosynthesis. This picture shows you the brine pool that can form around cold seeps. Cold seeps will have a brine pool because a lot of the processes that bring up that methane out of the tectonic plate will actually help to bring up salt, and so that salt will dissolve in the seawater and make a water that's much saltier than the surrounding seawater. And so it'll be more dense and it'll settle into a depression and create this little brine pool. And so you can see this is like the brine pool here, and then you got the mussels that form around the brine pool, and then out here is just simply like the muddy ocean bottom. And so it's kind of weird. And remember, you saw this in the video as well, it's like the underwater lakes basically. Species richness versus species abundance at the cold seep communities. The species richness is low, but the species abundance is high. So there's a few different types of species, but there's a lot of them. This is the opposite pattern that we saw on the abyssal plains. Okay, so the abyssal plains had a high species richness, low abundance. Opposite here. Here's just some pictures of some mussels and stuff that you'll find at cold seeps. Okay. Another type of community we will find is hydrothermal vents. These were first observed in 1977 by a bunch of geologists that were going to look at the mid-ocean ridge about 200 miles off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. And what they found was probably one of the biggest biological discoveries of the modern era. And they found an entire new ecosystem that we had no idea even existed. And so these things occur at the mid-ocean ridges where the plates are spreading apart. Okay, remember seafloor spreading and all of that stuff from last semester? It's where new seafloor is created, and you can also find them in the trenches, some of the trenches. So they're found at the mid-ocean ridges and at the trenches. This picture shows you the known vent locations. Okay, so you can see all the red dots. How do these actually form? Okay, so at the mid-ocean ridge, you have cracks in the rock. Okay, and because it's underwater and a lot of water, it's under a lot of pressure. And so that pressure forces the water into the sides of the mid-ocean ridge, into the rock. Okay, and when it gets in there, it absorbs minerals and it gets heated up because as it gets farther and farther down, it gets closer and closer to the mantle, which is hot. It heats the water up, and that water that is now hot is less dense and will rise back through the mid-ocean ridge towards the surface. Okay, and it breaks through the mid-ocean ridge, and when that hot vent water that's full of minerals encounters the cold deep water, there's a reaction that happens and the minerals fall out and actually form these chimneys that we see. So just some differences between vent water and seawater. The vent water is really, really hot. Okay, it can be over 730 degrees Fahrenheit, but it won't boil because it's under a lot of pressure because there's a lot of water sitting on top of it. At the surface, that would just instantly become steam, but here it doesn't even boil. The vent water is also really acidic, whereas seawater is basic, so that'll trigger the reaction. And then you've got a high metal content in the vent water, particularly with a lot of hydrogen sulfide. That hydrogen sulfide is actually poisonous to us and to most other animals, except for the ones that are actually like living here at the vents. And the vent water does not have oxygen. Okay, and so when this vent water meets the seawater, reaction happens and the minerals fall out. Here's a picture just to help you see it. So here's the seawater being forced into the mid-ocean ridge where it picks up minerals, gets heated up by the magma, okay, and then rises back out through the mid-ocean ridge. Here's the reaction occurring, and then all of those minerals will fall out and form the chimney. Alright, and so that's what's going on. Again, the food source of this ecosystem is chemosynthetic bacteria, but instead of using methane like they used at the cold seeps, they use hydrogen sulfide. And so you can see the reaction there. They make glucose and actually sulfuric acid, which is a really, really strong acid. So they have to be able to deal with the high acid levels. And then the way that they get food from these bacteria that can do chemosynthesis is the same as the cold seeps. So they can consume the free-living bacteria, have a symbiotic relationship with them, or eat things that depend on the bacteria. One of the main things that you will actually find at the vents are Riftia tube worms. These worms are really weird. They do not have like a mouth or a gut like a normal worm has. Instead, they have an organ that they use to harbor these chemosynthetic bacteria. And so what you see in this picture right here on the left, these like red parts, those are their gills that they actually stick into the water, and they use those gills to get oxygen for the bacteria that live inside of them. And they also collect the hydrogen sulfide that way as well. So these bacteria live inside of these worms, and the worms get food from the bacteria. We think that these are probably one of the fastest growing animals known, because they have to grow really fast, because a vent may only last 10 years, and they will get up to like 10 feet tall. So they're huge, and they grow very quickly. And it's weird, but they also have like human-like red blood, which is strange. Okay, so lifespan of a vent. So the vent is formed, okay, and is colonized by a bunch of creatures, and they come in a certain succession. And the vent will stay active for 10 to 40 years, and as it stays active, the community grows. But because it's on the mid-ocean ridge where there's a lot of tectonic activity, the plumbing can shift, and therefore the water will go somewhere else, and so the vent shuts down. And then everything that's there will die because they don't have any hydrogen sulfide anymore, and they can't do chemosynthesis, and so there's no basis of the food chain anymore. So once those vents die, then the animals that are there die as well. Species richness versus species abundance at the hydrothermal vents. The richness is low, so there's few different types of animals, but the abundance is high. So there's lots of them. So few different types, but lots of the types that are there. Again, this is the opposite pattern as the abyssal plain, but the same pattern as the cold seeps. These are just pictures to help you see like what the animals look like. Okay, so again, just some weird, strange creatures that are found there. Notice all of the tube worms. There's lots of tube worms down there. You can see the hydrothermal vent with all of the like water coming out, the reaction taking place. And then this slide just simply shows you, if you're interested in looking into making the study of the deep sea your life career, then these places have good undergraduate programs. And Woods Hole has a good one, but it's not for undergrads, it's for graduates. So, and that's it.